This is a brief rundown of the city of Jackson. The city of Jackson was founded in the year 1821, and it was named after General and former President Andrew Jackson, who served in the Battle of New Orleans in 1812, in which he was the victor. The city is located in the deep south, halfway between Memphis and New Orleans via Highway 55, and in between Dallas to the west and Atlanta to the east via Interstate 20. Hence why they call it the Crossroads of the South. Before this land was taken into possession due to some treaties and negotiations, it was majority occupied by the indigenous people of the area. Allegedly, under some firm convincing, most of these indigenous people fled from this place and all of their lands that were east of the Mississippi. I think that's why they call that long hike that indigenous people that were evacuated took to the west was called the Trail of Tears. And now we have all type of people spread out all over the United States. We have family that traces back to the Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, Louisiana region because they were all forced to flee their lands. The city is located on the historic Natchez Trace trade route, which was created by Native Americans but used by European American settlers. The city's first European settler was a guy named Louis Lafleur, a French Canadian trader who made his way into what we now call Jackson via the Pearl River, and the spot where he landed is now named Lafleur's Bluff. During the late 18th century and early 19th century, this site had a trading post. It was connected to markets in Tennessee. Shout out to Memphis. Soldiers returning to Tennessee from the wars down by New Orleans in 1815 built a public road that connected Lake Pontchartrain in Louisiana to the Lafleur Bluff district. So we've been having dealings with New Orleans and Memphis and Jackson. In 1826, Jackson was connected by road to Vicksburg and Clinton, which heads west towards Shreveport in Texas. And even though it doesn't sit on the Mississippi River, its railroad line that runs east to west helped its economy to grow. Despite its small population during the Civil War, Jackson became a strategic center of manufacturing for the Confederates. But this soon ended when the Union captured Andrew Jackson not once, but twice. Once before the fall of Vicksburg and once after. On May 13, 1863, Union forces won the First Battle of Jackson, forcing Confederates to flee north towards Canton, Mississippi. The next day, on May 14th, Union troops burned all the manufacturing spots that the Confederates had, stopping their money. Then, after pushing the Confederates out of Jackson, Union forces turned west and got into a war with the Confederates that were trying to defend Vicksburg. This was called the Battle of Champion Hill and was fought in Edwards, Mississippi. After beating them, the Union, they went on to take over Vicksburg, but meanwhile the Confederates that fled to Kenton snuck their way back into Jackson while the Union was away in nearby Vicksburg and attempted to repossess the city before heading to help Vicksburg men fight the Union. But unbeknownst to them, the Vicksburg Confederates and Ulysses S. Grant had already surrendered. So the Confederates fled back to Jackson. The Union soon took in a pursuit behind them to Jackson and proceeded to encircle and block in the Confederates in a week-long fight to ultimately retake the city of Jackson. Some of the Union's artillery used to take the city is still preserved on the campus of Millsaps College and the University of Mississippi Medical Center. On July 16, 1863, the remaining Confederate forces retreated in defeat during the night and fled across the Pearl River. To make sure they burned the Confederates' resources out, they set the entire city on fire. They burned the city so good that the city was nicknamed Chimneyville because the only thing left standing on houses were their chimneys. For those that are frequents of Jackson, the street known as Fortification Street was the northern line of the city, where Confederate soldiers defended themselves from intruders. Because of this one siege, many of the old antebellum style houses of this time were burned and no longer remain. However, a few were preserved from this time, like the governor's mansion, the old Capitol building, and the Jackson City Hall, and it's alleged that it was only spared because it housed the Masonic Lodge, or because it housed an army hospital. In 1871, the city introduced mule-drawn streetcars which ran on State Street, which were replaced by electric ones in 1899. In 1875, the Red Shirts were formed, which was a racist group that operated as the military arm of the Democratic Party to take back political power from the Republicans and to drive black people from the polls. Black people voted for the Republicans because they felt that the Republicans were the reason why they were emancipated and they wanted to ally with them. This attempt, however, to overthrow the Republican Party, threatening violence against black supporting voters for the Republican Party, was called the Mississippi Plan, and it was developed in 1875 by white Southern Democrats. Their success in scaring blacks away from the poll led to other states adopting this method in other majority black states and prohibiting gun ownership by blacks. In 1890, a new constitution effectively discouraged most blacks to stop trying to vote, and it wouldn't be until 1960 that they were able to vote again without intimidation. Another note of the Mississippi Plan was to intimidate freedmen and their families. Planters, landlords, and merchants of products all set out to intimidate black voters from voting by using economic intimidation, threatening to not sell garden food, to evict, and not to sell basic supplies, all helped to scare blacks away from the poll. And what that group lacked in economic intimidation, the red shirts made up for in violence, whippings, and murders at the polls. They were joined in these assaults against blacks by groups called rifle clubs, who provoked altercations at voting polls and used that to kill dozens of blacks. And when the governor requested federal troops to curb the violence, the president at the time, Ulysses S. Grant, that was defeated at the Battle of Vicksburg and Edwards, hesitated to act. During this time, most of Mississippi's largest black populated counties polled total votes in the amounts of 12, 7, 4, 2, and 0, successfully putting enough fear in blacks that the Democrats were able to regain control from the Republicans in 1876. Even Louisiana had an intimidation group that aided the red shirts. They were called the White League. Jackson is the only city in the U.S. to boast being built atop a dormant volcano as well, and the volcano's peak sits directly below the city's Mississippi Coliseum. During Mississippi Prohibition period from 1920s to the 1960s, illegal drinking and gambling casinos were in high demand and abundance on the east side of the Pearl River in Flowood, along with the original Highway 80. Those illegal casinos, bootleg liquor stores, and nightclubs made up Jackson's Gold Coast. After Prohibition ended and everything was made legal, integration happened and most illegal black market consumers of black ethnicity were swayed towards the newly legal white establishments. In other words, the black bootleg spots, they were left irrelevant after legalization, and most black people went on to shop with integrated white owners who surely welcomed all those black dollars. In 1960, Jackson became a site for the dramatic nonviolent protests aimed at reversing Mississippi Constitution and laws that disfranchised black people. At this time, Jackson's population was 64.3% white and 35.7% black, with Tougaloo College acting as a prime location for the training of young white and black students of the region to work together for civil rights. And over the years, Jackson jails were filled with freedom riders determined to embark on this area from other parts of the country in an attempt to change these unbalanced laws. From 1961 to 1963, businesses discriminated against blacks. Blacks could shop but not use fitting rooms. Black clerks weren't allowed to be hired in department stores, and they weren't permitted to use lunch counters to eat. But they did not want them. But they did want them to shop in their stores because they wanted their black dollars. Also, in 1963, Medgar Evers, leader of the Mississippi NAACP, was assassinated while in the driveway of his home in Jackson shortly after midnight on June 12, 1963. He'd later have a street named Medgar Evers after him, a library, the city airport, and all of Delta Drive. However, his murderer wouldn't be convicted until 31 years later in 1994. In 1967, the KKK also bombed the synagogue of the Beth Israel congregation in Jackson because the rabbi and his congregation supported civil rights. Following the decades of the Great Migration, where more than 1 million black people left the rural South since the 1930s, the state has been majority white in population, but blacks are the majority of the population in Jackson. Since 1968, Alico Records, who boasts such notable acts as Tyrone Davis, ZZ Hill, Denise LaSalle, Bobby Bland, and many others, has called Jackson home. In 1970, Jackson police killed 2 students and wounded 12 during a protest of the Vietnam War at Jackson State University. Jackson also had its influx of drugs that occurred in the 80s with smugglers using the state's highways, seaports, airports like that of Hawkins Field of Jackson. In 1997, Harvey Johnson Jr. was elected as Jackson's first black mayor. He was replaced by Frank Melton in 2005. A very controversial man, Frank Melton was because of his unorthodox methods of curbing crime. And the Frank Mara era itself is a whole nother video. On July 1st, 2013, Chokwe Lumumba was sworn into office as the mayor of the city. But after 8 months of being in office, Mayor Lumumba sadly passed away. And Mr. Lumumba Sr. was a very notable figure in the fight for justice and equality for blacks as well, with prior affiliations with the Republic of New Africa and the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America. Maybe that's why the current mayor of Jackson and son of Lumumba Sr., Chokwe Antar Lumumba, is having so much opposition while currently attempting to revamp the city. The city in present days faces ongoing infrastructure issues. Crime is an issue. The city's water is undrinkable due to failing water treatment plants due to age. But the love for the city continues to be the glue that keeps the long-term residents optimistic and patient. So if you're looking for a taste of Memphis, man, New Orleans, a little bit of Dallas, a little Atlanta, and many other cultures, all sprinkled into this one area, come on down or come on over to Jackson. And if your family has roots here but fled in the past, man, come on home and meet your folks. One, yeah.